So we're gonna get into the costume now in this portion of the DVD. This chapter we're gonna just do the UVs for a few pieces. There's many pieces on this costume, so we're not gonna get into all of them. I just picked a few pieces that I thought were interesting and that had uh, some more difficult parts to unwrap. This part is just the harness shoulder piece that's on his upper torso. It's all about selections in the beginning, getting your selections exactly where you want your UV pieces. This costume has a lot of different contours and things, so it's good to use the unfold tool in Maya, so I'm going to be using that. The way to use the unfold tool is to do a planar onto your selection so that you have borders that you've already defined. And then you create that shell, and then that shell is what you go ahead and do an unwrap on, or an unfold. So I've unfolded this piece here, and it looks pretty good. I've unfolded the collar too, but that's going to need a little more work, as it's kind of blown up a little bit. But it's a good starting point, and I'm just going to start cleaning this stuff up, taking a look at what's going on. Some of this is going to have to be refined. Sometimes the unfold will give you a good result, but certain areas will blow up, so you got to go in and clean them up. This UVing is a little more involved than the head. The head was quite simple and straightforward. This one, there's lots of little pieces and lots of strange borders and seams and whatnot. What I like to do is respect the seams of the actual material. So if there's a seam on the between, like, say, the collar and the shoulder, like, there would actually be stitching there. So that's a good place for if you need to end the texture, if it needs to be abrupted, that's the best place for it to be, because that's where it would be on the real object. So that's the first place you want to start as far as deciding where your borders are going to be for your different unwraps. Also, borders can be, like the one I just selected, can be on sort of the inside of objects. If you need them to wrap around slightly. You don't want always to have a complete shell, like a UV for the entire object, because it's not going to unwrap properly, so you need certain borders for it to sort of spread apart and have a good amount of clean, unstretched UVs. It will cause a few more borders, but borders are far better than stretching, because it can be easily painted over, as we've done multiple times already in body paint. And stretching can be painted through as well, but the problem is you don't have as much, if it's stretched small, you have not enough pixels to describe the texture that you want in that area. And if you have too much, then you're taking all of that texture information and you're squeezing it down into not very much space on the model, so you're wasting all of that pixel space. So usually seams are more desired than stretching, at least for my work. So I'm just working out this collar here. It's a very strange shape, but once you wrap your head around where the borders are going to be and what are the the major planes that are going to have the attached UVs, it's okay. It's just wrapping your head around it. When you get a mesh like this, you just you have to stop and just look at it and think about it, because there is a lot of stuff going on, and you can't just jump into it, or else you're going to end up redoing everything 20 times. And by the time you redo it, you'll have understood what the mesh needs. And sometimes you have to do that. Sometimes you have to redo it once or twice, but you don't want to have to do it any more than that. So I just found this sliver here that belonged over here, so I'm going to reattach it. A lot of this stuff that I'm working with right now is on the inside of the back of the collar, so I'm not too worried about what it's doing. I just want it to be clean and equally spaced in relation to what the actual mesh is doing. And when I'm UVing these, I'm also thinking about the texture and what the texture is going to be. I know for this one it's going to be, Mark requested a sort of a synthetic look, or a sort of a maybe a leathery sort of plasticky kind of surface. So I'm not expecting to have a lot of crazy frequency, at least in the color maps and stuff. So I'm just making sure that it's clean, but I'm not too worried about it at this point. But you want to be able to keep yourself open. So if it does change, you have UVs that can support a wide range of different textures. This portion is in the close-up shot, so a good amount of attention needs to be dealt to it, because the head and the collar and the upper portion of this piece are all clearly visible in the close-up shot. So we got to make sure that there's not going to be any visible stretching. I'm using a lattice tool. I don't use these tools that often, but every once in a while they can be useful. The texture map that I'm using to preview this, as I did in all the previous ones, is one that I recommend over anything else. It gives you a good sense of what's going on, and I like to pay attention to some of the little stuff like this. The small grid that is on there is extremely useful, as well as the numbering system. And there are other ones available, but this style of UV preview map is probably the best that you can use. Right now I'm trying to figure out some of this miscellaneous mesh work that's in the corners and things that weren't really thought out on the modeling process, but for good reason. They're not going to be seen. And but I just want to have them be equal to everything else as far as having the proper UV space. And there's a hole right there I gotta figure out. Okay, so there's a hole in the actual mesh, which, those things slip through sometimes, so we'll just we'll patch it up ourselves, and then we'll pass it along. Should be okay at this point. The rigging is not too far along with this part of the model, so I feel comfortable just changing that and sending it along. For now, I'm going to do the same mirror technique that I used on the head, and I'll be using across the board, just because I don't want to have to change the mesh. Well, I was going to fix the mesh, but I'm not too worried about that at this point, but I like to keep my workflow consistent and not change it every time. But little things like the hole in the vest are stuff that I'll go ahead and fix. So there's some issues with the mirror here that I can change. Right now I'm just thinking about placement, which is a big thing. Trying to figure out where it's going to go on the map and how much space it's going to take up. How much space I want it to take up. What the texture resolution is going to be on this guy, and the scale. Okay, so we're jumping over to the legs, which is quite a beastly piece, but Kaj had done a quick unwrap on this before sending it over. It's not perfect, but I'm going to use it as a starting point. Sometimes this will happen. You'll get a mesh and something's already been laid out. Not something that you necessarily like, but you can use it to start with and not have to redo, or not start from complete scratch. So I'm just going to use this as a starting point and start cleaning it up. Sometimes you'll have to clean up other people's UVs, and this is a good example. I'm just taking out the border so that I can do a relax. And I'll be able to select that border much easier once this is all spread out. And the relax tool doing its job. So from the start, this UV was decent, but there's some areas that need some work. So the crotch area is important because there's going to be a lot of deformations happening there, and we want it to have a good texture map. We don't want it to be bad from the beginning and then add extra stretching. The pocket there is a little strange. We're going to have to work that out later. The texture on this object is going to be more involved. There's going to be a lot of different surface types, possibly some procedural work. We'll see where it goes, but I want to give myself the most amount of flexibility. And the unwrap is looking pretty good in that whole section, except for the pocket. The lower portion's pretty simple. It's basically just a cylinder. And it's already been unwrapped for the most part. It just needs to be fixed. So we'll just relax it until it works. So there's an issue on the bottom, but we're just going to fix that. That's all tucked in within the boot, but I want to give it a little less distortion so that it doesn't start to skew as it goes down into the boot. This whole area is not seen a lot in this production, so I just want to make sure it's clean, and I'm going to move on. These can be separate or stitched. It's up to you. You can stitch stuff, but I'm not too worried about that area because it was connected by a knee pad, so that pretty much overlaps the whole thing. This back piece is basically just a flat deal, so I'm just going to do a planer on there. I'm going to find out where it goes on this piece. This one I'm going to stitch just because I want to keep this part together. moving the borders out so I can relax it again. It's a little tedious. You can select a border, but scaling it is not going to do a whole lot unless the object is actually a square or a circle. Perfect. So I just do it by hand. You can cut off that little piece that got too much of it. And right now I'm just worried about one side because I'm going to use that same technique of mirroring it over and not worrying about the other side. It was flipped the wrong way, so I'm flipping it and I'm going to stitch it together. Mostly just precautionary moves here so that the inside doesn't have any overlap displacement or anything like that. Here I'm just worried about the border. If I can get the border into something that I can read, all I have to do is hit the relax button and it will start to reshape itself. And it helps me clear it up and see what it's doing. And sometimes it's hard to see, or it's hard to make out in your head what's actually going on. But once you can use that relax a couple times, it'll start to nudge everything into where it should be going. So now I'm using the smear tool just to kind of push stuff around and see how it was responding. That whole area is going to be tricky, so I'm going to have to do some custom moving around in here. You get rid of that for now, and I'm just going to focus on this area because it's strange. One thing to do too is when you're UVing is you should, well, I haven't done it here because I forget all the time, but turn off history if possible. It'll speed things up and you won't have to keep clearing history. Definitely keeps it faster. Here I just projected it because I had so much going on I didn't know what was happening and it was looking bad. So at that point I just reproject it with a planar so that it has a accurate description of what's happening, and then I go from there. Sometimes that's the best way to just reset it, is to take a chunk that's a problem area and just do a planar from the best possible angle, and then reevaluate it and go back in and start retweaking it again. So overall, this is looking pretty good. We're not going to see the back at all, but I want to have clean UVs on the whole object. Oftentimes when you're doing an asset, you'll be asked to either do renders from all different angles or do a turntable or whatever. And so it's good to pay attention to the areas, all the areas of the asset. And if you're doing like a digital double or a character that's running around in the scene, most likely you're going to see most angles of him. I had some sort of weird stitch there. I grabbed the wrong edge, so I'm just going to be more careful about my edge selection here. So that's looking much better than it did before. Just kind of worked it out. And we have one side of the leg done. I'm just going to move on to the hands and skip the mirroring process for the leg because we've already seen it. And it's the same deal. The hands are sometimes can be a pain. You can get 80% of the way there within a couple seconds by just doing a planer from top to bottom. And then you get a bunch of problems with in between those points and all the funky contours in between the fingers. So I do a planar on each side, and then right in the middle of the hand, right down the middle, I do a seam, and then I start working with that seam and getting it to not look ugly. Mostly just bringing out these borders. I tried doing a unfold on the hands, and unfold on hands is very unreliable because you have a very strange shape and lots of protrusions with all connected to each other. So when I attempted to unfold this using Maya's tools, I pretty much exploded. And you'll find that too in projects. You'll be working on a strange shape and you'll be using unfold for everything, and it works amazing, and then you'll do it on this one shape and it'll just freak out. So I decided just to do a custom edit on this based on what's going to be seen and what I feel that is good for the texture resolution. There is a little bit of close-up hand in the close-up shot as he holds his cigar, so it's something to think about. It's going to be interior is going to be somewhat dark. Not too worried about what's visible. There'll be a little bit in the way he holds the cigar, but all of the aspects of the hand won't be seen at the same time. So same with the rest of them. I'm just worried about the border. The border is what dictates how the rest is relaxed. So just keep relaxing it. Another option too, and I've done this in the past, even with the sample work that you saw in the beginning of this DVD, there was a hand that I had done, and sort of a creature hand. And that creature hand was UV'd a little differently. The way I UV'd it was to basically UV the meat of the hand, the main part of the hand, and the fingers independently. So there was basically a seam running across right where the fingers join the main body of the hand. And that's one way of doing it too. If you have a lot of 3D paint programs that you can cover the seams easily, and that allows you to pay more attention to each finger individually and not worry about where the UV meets up with the hand. And that's another option for you as well. For this, I just wanted to have it one whole piece so that the texturing process is a little faster. That way you just have one chunk that you can manipulate. So I'm just editing these borders per finger. It's pretty tedious, but I'm going to get the best possible outcome for the interior of the fingers. So the original unwrap here is kind of ugly, adding a lot of garbage in the middle. And this area for hands is always the worst part. So it's a good idea to put most of your attention here, where I am right now, making sure that there's not too much craziness happening. He actually has extra geometry in this area because there's like a seam that goes right down the middle. which is good and bad. There's extra geometry to unwrap, but it also allows us to hide where the two UV maps join with shading and difference in texture. It'll all be helpful in the end. So the tips of the fingers can be a pain too, but they're not going to have a whole lot of texture information, so not to worry about it. And the tips of the fingers, unless you have a full screen hand, you're not going to even see. I'm mostly just worried about the overall consistency of the UV map so that everything is equally paid attention to. Some areas like this are just a real pain in the ass, and will never look perfect, but if you can work it out to at least have some non-overlapping minimal stretching, this is about as best as you can do. So this is just going to continue into more of the same. I think the concepts have been pretty well covered for this, so we're just going to move on to doing the textures for all these pieces. The pieces that we'll be doing will just be a few of the, like I said, many pieces of this object or of this character. I'm going to be texturing the pants, the torso piece that we saw earlier that I UV'd first, and then maybe some miscellaneous pieces like some pouches or something. But that will give us something to get an idea of the overall process for taking this surface qualities that Mark has defined and putting them across the entire character.